Economic Development and Tourism. Today we have the Minister of Economic Development and Tourism as well as the Wesgro Board before the committee. Just to give a little bit of context for today's meeting, there was a news article indicating that there is an increase in the Wesgro CEO's remuneration. After this particular article in the news, I wrote to the Minister, Minister David Mania, asking for information and clarity. The Minister referred this to the board as it is a board decision that was made. The board, Wesgro Board, then replied in writing to the committee. The information was distributed to all of the members, after which I invited the Minister as well as the Wesgro Board to the meeting today in order to brief us on the process essentially that occurred and whether to determine essentially whether the Minister has had enough reasons in order to act and make a request to the board. In this regard, just to note for those who are watching, we are on YouTube for the members, and let me just quickly mute all beforehand just for the background noise. And also the invited persons, I received apologies. Mr. Brian Figachi and Ms. Judah February was also invited, but I've received apologies for both. Points of order, members, if you could raise your hand when you would like to speak, or if you would like to raise a point of order. There's also the chat box in case you would like to flag a point of order in the chat box. And I urge members to switch their videos and audios off unless they are speaking, and presenters are welcome to share their presentation. Yes, members, I'm going to allow you to introduce yourselves, and then Minister and the board, I'll allow you to introduce your team today here, And then what I'll do is I'll allow the minister to make an opening statement. And then after the minister, I will allow the board to do their presentation. And then I will allow for questions and answers. Yes, perfect. Members?
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, Minister. Good morning, everyone on the line. My name is Dalen Mitchell, and I'm a member of this committee.
Good morning, Chair. Andrikus van der Westhuizen, also a member of this committee.
Thank you.
Morning, Chair. Lulama Mvimbi, alternate member of the committee.
Thank you and welcome.
Good morning, Ricardo Mackenzie, alternate member of the committee.
Thank you and welcome.
Morning, Chairperson, and morning, Minister. My name is Nomi Nkondlo. I'm a member of the committee, and I would also want to put it on record that in addition to what the Chair has said, we also had asked for the explanation of, what is happening at Westgrow, and we would like for this meeting to also note such. And secondly, I would like to understand if Chair can share with us the reasons for the apologies of the two members that one had asked specifically to be part as people who had resigned, because we would love to also get their version of what has been in the media. Thank you very much.
No problem. I'll do that after the introductions.
Good morning,
Any other
Maseko and alternate.
Thank you and welcome to the meeting. Anyone else? I do see some names on the side here, but I don't know if they've all connected with us, or are those all the members? I see member Barnes, member Philander's names also, but I'm not sure if they can hear us.
Chair, I should
once.
introduce myself, Michael Spicer, acting chair of Westgrow.
Thank you. Minister, you and Mr. Spicer can then introduce the rest of the team, or would you like the team to be introduced as they speak?
Chair, good morning to you, and good morning to members of the committee. Obviously, my name is David Mania. I'm the Minister of Finance and Economic Opportunities, and I'm joined by my head of department, Solly Fourie.
Good morning, members. Good morning, Chair. Solly Fourie.
Thank you. Let me just see here quickly. Okay. Let me quickly deal with the apologies that I received. The one apology was from Mr. Brian Figachi, and he indicated that he thinks it's inappropriate for him to attend since he's not on the board anymore. And Ms. Judith February was going to attend, but then she sent in an apology indicating that she has an urgent board meeting to attend during the time of the meeting, another urgent board meeting. So that was her response, indicating, when did she email this? Yeah, she emailed this yesterday afternoon. Okay. Perfect. Now, perfect. Minister, we can jump right into the statement then, and then the board can present after that.
Thank you, Chairperson, and once again, good morning to all the members and alternate members of the committee. I'd really like to begin by thanking you for the opportunity to make an opening statement, which I would like to focus on briefly outlining the problem, but I think much more importantly, focusing on a solution going forward. I want to begin by saying what is not at issue. So what is not at issue here, I think, is the performance of the Chief Executive Officer of Westgrow, Tim Harris, or indeed the considerable contribution of Westgrow to driving economic growth and job creation in the Western Cape. That is not at issue here. But what is at issue I think, are concerns that have been raised by myself and indeed by serving and former directors of the Westgrove board that relate to, for example, the reappointment process, good governance principles, and broadly remuneration levels to which you referred, and which have led to a difference of opinion between myself and the Westgrove board. Now, when I first became aware of these issues, which of course was after the decision was taken and after the contract had been signed, I did take action after taking legal advice and of course in line with my executive oversight role, given the fact that I had two principal concerns. The first, of course, was that the increase in the remuneration that had been agreed to was, of course, significant and, in my view, excessive given the economic environment and the fiscal constraints that existed at the time the contract was signed. And the fact, of course, that the increase in total remuneration would be funded using public funds. And second, of course, concerns had been raised by some directors about the manner in which the decision was taken by the Westgrove board. And some of those decisions, of course, include the fact that the decision was taken based on a verbal presentation, that there was possibly insufficient information and documentation, and that one of the board committees, the Human Resource Committee, had not been consulted. To be fair, Chairperson, an offer to reduce the remuneration package was made and was subsequently agreed to by the board. But the original contract included an increase in salary from 2.1 to 2.7 million rand as a result of a benchmarking exercise, and then bolted on over and above that was an increase in a performance-related bonus to 30%, which would mean that the total remuneration, including the salary and the bonus, and assuming that 100% of the bonus was achieved, would have increased to about 3.5 million in 2021, which I regarded as excessive given the economic environment and the fiscal constraints that existed at the time. So given those concerns, I acted, and I think what transpired after that has been traversed in the documents which have been furnished to the committee. I think what's much more important now is to brief the committee on where we are at present, because in the last couple of weeks and the last couple of days, we have had, I think, some very good and some very constructive discussions. And I think we've made significant progress, and we've reached an agreement to conduct an independent review of broadly whether the process and the decision to reappoint the Chief Executive Officer complied with applicable legislation, on whether the process and the decision to reappoint the Chief Executive Officer and, of course, to determine remuneration levels complied with the principles of good governance, and on whether the benchmarking exercise used to determine the level of remuneration, as well as the process to determine the bonus, was credible and defendable. So we've made really, I think, very significant progress after, I think, some good and constructive discussions, which means that my concerns and the concerns raised by some of the directors and former directors of the Westgrove board will now be independently reviewed. And we hope that this will now take us to put this matter at rest as soon as possible, and to allow us to begin to focus on what's really important, which of course is recovery in the Western Cape. So we, I think, have a clear path forward, and I think that I'm confident that we are going to resolve this issue. Thank you very much, Chairperson.
Thank you. So I just wanted to, before the Westgrove do their presentation, so the new information you've given us you say that they've agreed to, you have agreed with Wesgro to an independent review.
Chairperson, that is correct. I mean, the point I'm making is that we've been in discussion in the last couple of days. Those discussions, I think, have been good and constructive, and we have now agreed that there will be an independent review broadly, and I'll just reiterate this, of whether the process and the decision to reappoint the Chief Executive Officer complied with applicable legislation, whether the process and the decision to reappoint the Chief Executive Officer and to determine his remuneration complied with the principles of good governance, and whether the benchmarking exercise used to determine the level of remuneration, as well as the process used to determine the bonus, was credible and defendable. That is what we've agreed to do.
Okay. Wesgro, Mr. Spicer.
Point of order.
Thank you, Chair.
Honourable Dugmore, just sorry, Mr. Spencer. Honourable Dugmore has a point of order. What is this point of order, Mr. Dugmore?
Thank you very much, Chair. Apologies for joining a few minutes late, but did you cover the in terms of attendance at this meeting? My understanding is that 2 board members have resigned, the chair and Mr. Figaji and Judith February. Can I just check, have they, are they present in this meeting? Have they been invited to this meeting? If they were invited, have they, and they're not here, have they apologized?
Thank you, Honourable Dugmore, for your point of order. You can drop your hands now. If you were earlier in this meeting, I did note the apologies from Mr. Brian Figachi as well as Ms. Judith February. I indicated the reasons for the apologies that they've sent to me as well. Mr. Brian Figachi indicated that he does not want to attend because he believes it's inappropriate to attend as he's not on the board anymore. And Ms. Judith February indicated she was going to attend, but then she sent me an apology indicating she has another urgent board meeting that she needs to attend today, which coincides with the time of this meeting. But previously she indicated that she would only attend as an observer anyway. Does this assist you, Mr. Dugmore, Honourable Dugmore?
It does assist me greatly. Thank you, Chair. I just think at the end of the meeting, we would also need to arrange specifically that we hear the view of those board members that have resigned. And I trust that we can make a resolution to that effect later.
Thank you for your comments, Honourable Dugmore. I would urge, let's quickly listen to the presentation first. We've now heard the Minister's statement. We are going to now listen to the board's presentation, and then it will be questions and answers, as I've indicated previously, and then only we will be going to admin such as resolutions, for example. Thank you. You may go ahead, Mrs. Spencer.
It's Mr. Spicer, Chair.
Apologies, Mr. Spicer.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. I am happy to be appearing before this committee. The board of Wesgro firmly believes in accountability, and so we take our place alongside our colleagues from the ministry in order to deal with this issue. I did, of course, circulate via the committee an extensive set of documentation, including the presentation. Some of that would address the issues raised by Honourable Dugmore, because there is extensive written explanation by both the previous chair and indeed by Ms. Judith February, the 2 persons who had retired or resigned from the board. I am going to take most of this as read, but I do have a few preliminary comments to make about the nature of Wesgro, because I don't believe it is entirely understood how this entity operates and how it has transformed in the fullest sense of the word over the past 5 years. If one looks at the history of Wesgro and the nature of the Wesgro Act.
Chairperson.
Yes, Honourable Mackenzie.
Chairperson, Yes, Chairperson, if I may, we, as indicated by yourself at the start of this meeting, and as a member and many members of this Parliament for 6 years and serve on several committees, we do understand the role of WESGRO, and we're here to deal with a matter that the Minister gave a preliminary view in. So unless the acting chair is going to speak on that matter, I would suggest we continue. Because otherwise we're going to go to WESGRO, their performance. We know WESGRO, we know what they do. We're here to deal with a specific matter. We can just make sure that we understand that purpose why we're here.
Chairperson, sorry, on a point of order.
Yes, Honourable Dugmore.
Chairperson, I don't think it's correct for other members to try and determine what someone wants to say in this meeting. The Mr. Spicer indicated that he wants to make a few preliminary comments, and I think he's been asked to come here, and it's not for us to tell him what he should or shouldn't say. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Spicer, please continue, also taking into account the nature of our meeting today.
Thank you, Chair. My preliminary comments are preliminary to dealing with the specific issues. So they are there to frame the issues, and the issues are indeed set out in the presentation, which has been circulated and which I will speak to. So if I may continue, why was WESGRO set up? I think both the city and the province believed that an agency that was not encumbered by the constraints government faced in terms of bureaucratic process would do much more in terms of economic development and promotion if it could operate freely and independently. So it was also believed that it was important that it be able to operate in collaboration with the private sector. And this makes WESGRO unique. That is often an overtraded word, but there is no other agency in South Africa that brings the city, the province, and the private sector together. The second question I think that is relevant is why did the now Premier, then Minister of Economic Opportunities, in establishing the board 5 years ago, deliberately set out to have a predominance of senior private sector people on the board? The answer to that, it was to take advantage of the experience of these private sector people in order to drive a private sector oriented way of performing and to make it much more private sector facing. So what did the board do with the new CEO who was appointed at the same time pretty well as the new board? So it's changed the business model fundamentally from an input focused, which equated performance with process. For example, how many meetings did the relevant divisions of WESGRO have, to an output-based model, focusing on outcomes. And these outcomes, in line with global best practice, have to be measured, monitored, audited, and audited by the Auditor General and reported. And they are all measured, monitored, and evaluated in terms of stretch goals that the board sets in discussion with the executive management in the relevant areas of operation. So trade, tourism, investment, film, and so on. Over the 5 years, this entity has fundamentally transformed, and I have known it in its various guises for 30 years. It started out as a virtually moribund body, which under the previous administration had a board dominated by politicians and officials, into now, according to the World Bank, this is not according to me, it is according to the World Bank, South Africa's premier promotion agency, and they added last year in their evaluation of WESGRO, possibly the best in the Southern Hemisphere. This transformation can be seen not only in terms of the demographics of the staff, but those are interesting in the journey we are all undertaking in a democratic South Africa. So the staff currently 71% female, 37% male, 39% colored, 35% African, 28% white, and 6% Indian. But equally importantly, it is a young, dynamic team. The average age is 38. This organization is now bigger. It has a much, much wider mandate. It's better funded, and it has significant private sector financial contributions in a number of areas. So it is a much more complex entity, a much more high performance entity than the one that existed 5 years ago. Alone in South Africa, and I make that without fear of contradiction, it has the ability to forge and drive multi-party collaborative initiatives, multi-agency collaborative initiatives over the 3 tiers of government, national, provincial, and metropolitan stroke local, and between a number of private and public sector entities with, as I said earlier, financial contributions flowing from the private sector and other agencies as well. This is seen most obviously, I think members will know about the Air Access initiative, which has received global recognition as a best-in-class collaborative enterprise. But there have been similar collaborative enterprises during the water crisis, which Wesgro drove, both in substantive terms, but also communication terms, in a number of tourism initiatives, in establishing a COVID information platform that enabled small and medium and other entities to access information and access the various grant-making funds that were available during this emergency, and in a number of other areas. So this indicates that Wesgro's mandate has now expanded quite dramatically from what it was 5 years ago. And indeed, if one compares it with KwaZulu-Natal, Wesgro is doing the job of 6 agencies in KwaZulu-Natal. That is KwaZulu-Natal Tourism, Trade and Investment KwaZulu-Natal, Invest Durban, Dubai Trade Port, and the KwaZulu-Natal Film Commission. The CEO has had to operate at all these levels and with the skill to navigate all the political, bureaucratic, and people difficulties that one inevitably faces in terms of such multi-agency initiatives. In South Africa, this is a very rare and scarce talent. Leading a performance-oriented agency like this is very, very unusual. We're all aware of the problems we've had with performance in terms of various state entities. So this is an exception. Let me give you one germane recent example. All investments have to be declared so that they can be audited. The company has to set down in writing the size of the investment, the number of jobs created, and all of this has to be monitored and audited in the collated reports which we put to this committee, amongst others, and the Parliament of the province. Last week, we received a declaration of an 8.5 billion rand investment. This is the largest the province has ever had, and it is the first of possible further phases. This has been several years in the making. I've personally been somewhat involved on the sidelines, but I've had the opportunity to meet the company and the executives from that company driving that. And let it be put on record that the individual who was the chief executive driving this investment in South Africa, where they chose the Western Cape for that investment, said to me, given all of the problems of the last few years, the profile of the country, its political and economic challenges, the inevitable and perhaps not so inevitable bureaucratic hurdles that had to be surmounted. This person said to me directly that if it had not been for the CEO of Wesgro, this investment was quite unlikely to have been continued because his personal contribution was pivotal to that 8.5 and possibly now in further phases, much, much wider investment. Let me then conclude these preliminary comments with a note about some of the aspersions that have been cast on the CEO's ability to operate in any other milieu, whether it is private sector or other state entities. It's been asserted that he could not get another job, that he certainly in the current circumstances, even if he could get another job, he wouldn't be able to increase his package. I've indicated the scope and scale at which Wesgro now operates. A very senior person who simply came to Wesgro, and again, put it on record that this person has said she only came because of the current CEO, has just moved back into the private sector with an offer that could not be refused. That offer was not 1.5 or 2 or 2.5 or 3 times the current salary that that person was receiving. It was over 3 times. And I simply make the point that this is a reflection of the market for scarce talent. We are struggling in South Africa because we have a limitation of skills, and we particularly have a limitation of skills at the very top level, which are able to profoundly change the performance and nature of institutions and to drive forward in a results-oriented way. So that's a sort of framing set of comments. Let me now turn, with the help of Giselle, to a very brief survey of the presentation that was circulated earlier. Okay, Giselle, if you'd like to drive the presentation. This simply summarizes some of the points that I've made so we can move on. That equally summarizes some of the performance. Now, it's important, and we should say at the outset that as the Minister has taken legal opinion, so have we. We have taken an extensive legal opinion from Webber Wentzel, private sector firm, who have confirmed that our interpretation of the Wesgro Act is absolutely correct, that the board is an independent board, that it is specifically empowered to set salaries, that the Minister, whilst he should be informed on matters like that, has no right to be consulted on the reappointment of the existing CEO who has gone through the consultative process in his first term, and that therefore the process and the very careful process lasting from August last year through to February this year, and after discussions over the past 5 years, has been a fair process. It's been a process that has had compliance with the existing governance systems. And we believe, and we take a different view, therefore, to the Minister, we believe that his attempts, and this has been confirmed in the legal opinion that we have, to interfere in the substance of the package is in fact executive overreach. And the legal finding that we have is absolutely clear-cut and specific, therefore. Now, I too want to, as the Minister has indicated, focus more on the way going forward, and he's absolutely right. In order to resolve this matter, we've agreed to have an external review in 3 parts, with senior legal counsel evaluating the legal issues relating to what the Act says and what it doesn't say, the remuneration methodology that was used in the expert consultant, which we had, and then finally the governance and the processes that we have in the Wesgro board. So this is a full evaluation. It will, of course, naturally be reported inter alia to this committee, so there's nothing to hide in terms of that. Right, next slide, Giselle. Okay, and I've covered that. We also believe we are fully compliant with the PFMA insofar as it applies to this process. Carry on. So the benchmarking exercise, which is detailed in some of the correspondence as an appendix to this presentation, sets out just how carefully the chair and myself, in contracting with Rob Oakley, a well-respected consultant in benchmarking, where he drew his comparative figures from. Again, that is set out in much more detail in the appendices, and the process that was followed. So again, we took due care. I think it's entirely defensible, the process and the methodology adopted and the results that were achieved. Carry on. We had reference in that benchmarking exercise not only to the public sector and not only to the benchmarking group, the peer group that was selected as the most appropriate, given that Wesgro is a somewhat unique agency. And finally, we naturally had to have reference to equivalent provincial promotional agencies in the country. And here is the comparator sector. And you can see that the board specifically and carefully took a prudent approach in not trying to match either the then 2 years old benchmarking of those 4 agencies, let alone the estimated, because those are not revealed yet in reports, but even applying a simple basic inflationary process, you will see that these agencies pay far in excess of what the chief executive's adjusted salary is. And indeed, as I indicated earlier, they do a fraction of the work of Wesgro. I specifically alluded to TIKZN. There are 5 other entities that work in the fields that Wesgro does aside from TIKZN. Okay, the equivalents are set out below. Let's move on. So having done all of that, at the board meeting, there was a verbal presentation explaining all the methodology that had been approached. There was a clear, open discussion. No further questions, once they had all been answered, were asked, and everybody agreed to the package that was tabled there. So consequently, there was no reason not to sign the contract on the Monday following. And you recall that this process should have been concluded in 2019, but given the fact that we had a human resources issue and the ball was dropped, it was deferred into 2020. Having followed that, as you see from the appendices, some board members did raise some issues thereafter. And so we decided to call a further board meeting where all the paper, including the exhaustive detail of the methodology used for the benchmarking exercise, was tabled. As we've indicated, all of this process unfolded prior to any cases of COVID-19 in South Africa, let alone the lockdown. Nevertheless, at the board meeting in March, the CEO volunteered in an unsolicited offer to take a cut both in terms of the salary and the bonus, and to stagger the increase over 3 years in a reflection of what was then beginning to unfold. At that board meeting, having followed all of those discussions and the tabling of all the information, the board, not unanimously, because as you know, one board member did resign thereafter, but the overwhelming majority of the board confirmed the decisions of the February board, and the fact that the contract was a binding contract arrived at in a fair manner according to due process and exercising all due prudence. Next slide. So in summary, there sets out the factors that we've discussed and some of the issues that I have highlighted in my presentation. And I'd be very happy to answer questions. I should add that my colleague, Johnny Copeland, the CEO of HCI Investments, is joining me, and he too will be available for questions if necessary. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Spicer. Before I open up for questions and answers, I would just like to reiterate that I would like us to please try to stick to the topic at hand as far as possible. Otherwise, the amount of time we have for our meeting is not going to be enough. Okay. Members, I'm going to take questions now. Okay, I saw a hand and then it went away. Honorable van der Westhuizen, okay. Honorable Nkondlo, okay, so Honorable van der Westhuizen and Honorable Nkondlo.
Good morning again, Chair. Chair, thank you very much to both Minister Meinier and Mr. Spicer for briefing us. And thank you also for sharing the correspondence that ensued over the last few months to this committee beforehand. And I'm delighted to have learned from the onset this morning that this process will now be handed over for independent review. And my question, I would like to deal with the review, because I would also like to focus on the way going forward. And the first one is, has the board already agreed to this review, or is it something that the leadership in that board will still have to take to the board? Secondly, will the mandate of this review be formulated in consultation with the MEC and obviously with the board's input as well? And then thirdly, would you, as the board and as well as the MEC, would you aim to come to an agreement as to who should be the independent reviewer that will be engaged and that will be asked to undertake this review? Thank you, Chair. I do hope that if needed, we would have further rounds of questions allowed. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable van der Westhuizen. Honorable Nkondlo.
Thank you, Chairperson. I do have a couple of questions, and before I can even talk about, a process forward, I think my interest on the issue is more historic, in the sense that I would like to understand what happened to get us to this point where we are in this meeting. So pardon me if I don't take the route of, a way forward. And maybe having considered, I think, the letters and all the information that was shared with us, I'm interested to understand a couple of things. Amongst others, is that maybe let me start with the remarks of the minister. I would like to ask to the minister that the independent review he's referring to, is it part of the investigation that he promised the House through the response to Member Heron on the 3rd of April? Is it the second part of that investigation, which I think he alludes to in terms of the independent review? And if so, by when should we then expect the conclusion, of this particular process? And given the fact that 2 members of the board have already resigned specifically, as they indicate, because of this issue, and unfortunately they're not here today, I would like to understand that in the scope of the independent review, will those two ex-board members be called, you know, to the meeting or to the investigation by the independent reviewer, you know, to answer questions? Because when one reads some of their letters, there are a lot of issues that are being raised by both the former chairperson and also Ms. January in terms of the process. So I'm interested to understand that from the minister, and between the minister and the board, linked to what Member Van der Stuyven has said, who is going to appoint this independent reviewer? How is that process going to unfold? And indeed, I'm trying to understand, because initially the minister said there is an agreement on the independent review, and the acting chair, I think, perhaps I didn't get him properly. I hear that from their side, maybe he can confirm that indeed they've agreed to the independent review. I think that will be important just to give clarity to that point. And then to the acting chair, the interesting concept about the board or WESCO being free and independent. I'm trying, because I see also in the correspondence between the board from the chair to the minister, I think in between when minister was asking, this issue comes back, and I think also the acting chair in his prelim raises this. So if he can just clarify me, this free and independent, it's free and independent from whom? From the private sector to government, because I do not want to make assumptions about what he's saying. And I want to understand from him what in his own understanding or interpretation is the meaning of that free and independent, given that this is a state-owned entity, a Schedule 3C under the performance, the PFMA, and funded by a government. So clarify to me, when you say it's free and independent, what is the point that is being raised, you know, about the character of this particular entity? And is it not true that the current CEO that we are talking about is a former politician who was a member of the Parliament of the Democratic Alliance? And therefore, if so, how do you believe in, if I'm understanding you properly, because you even said the previous administration, you know, or the board of WESCO was full of politicians, and currently WESCO is led administratively by a former politician. So how do you reconcile, you know, those? And again, when you talk about casting aspersions, who cast aspersions on the CEO? Because I want to agree, I think, on this one, that when I understand and when I picked up the issue in the media, for me, I think indeed it was never about, you know, the performance of the board of WESCO, which as the committee we have been engaging, you know, committee after committee, annual report after annual report. You know, it was really more about the process. And when I read, again, in terms of what has been asked by the minister, I am finding, you know, a lot of gaps, you know, in terms of some of the responses that the board provided to the minister, amongst others, which maybe I might be clarified between both the minister and the acting chair, is that in one of the meetings, it is indicated that a verbal appraisal on this process of the appointment was actually done in a meeting. And is this common practice that such would be the case in terms of, you know, the process of the appointment? And again, can I be clarified that you know, a meeting in 2018, I think one of the letters indicate that August 2018, there was a discussion of the board that agreed to commence the renewal of the CEO's reappointment. You know, and again, I'm asking a question. Was it already the period of the end of the contract, that is now the 5-year contract of the CEO, had it came to an end by that time in August 2018, why the board felt that already by then it should confirm a renewal of his contract? And unfortunately, I'm not sure who's going to answer this part. The chairperson or the former chair, who is not here now, on behalf of the board, alleges political expediency. And I think, again, the acting chair, indicates political interference by minister in as far as his intention to try and understand what is going on in as far as this increment is concerned. And once again, I'm trying to understand, what does that mean? Because at this point, indeed, Westgrow as a Schedule 3C of PFMA, it is an entity of the state. It is having an executive authority, who is the MEC, and it does come here to the standing committee, as it done today, to report to us. How does then, questions along, things that would have a financial implication on this entity, given the economic climate, even before the COVID-19. I think South Africa's recession, started long before the COVID-19. How does, inquiry about such financial decisions become overreach? Are we not overreaching as a standing committee then, if we take that line, by Westgrow, if we have to ask these particular questions around, the substantive? And substantive at this point is the rationale behind such a decision, given, the economic climate and economic environment that South Africa's economy is under, wherein, the government will then have to draw, all the funds that they have to keep and sustain this entity. Let me just stop there at this point, Chair. Thanks.
Thank you, Honourable Mvidi.
I'm fine, Chairperson.
Okay, thank you. So I see at the moment, I'll add at the moment as well. What is really important is to understand exactly what needs to, in terms of the West Act and in terms of PMFA. So obviously, the first thing I would like to see in any independent review, and I don't know that this will take into consideration, is it an appointment or is it a reappointment? Because it is an appointment or reappointment that will govern specific things in terms of the legislation. Secondly, which I'd like to see from the independent review, is really where I can ask, okay, in terms of remuneration, how does it work? How does the board decide that? What factors have to be taken into account? Have those be taken into account? For me, I'm not disputing the fact that the board is the one making the the law, but do you feel that the board must then be able to at least, given these factors, there's the decision we've made? And for me, what view which this has, okay, wait, I'm just doing some background noise, so I'm going to quickly mute all, because my connection is also not amazing. I was kicked out of my own meeting last night a number of times as well. Okay. Cool. So for me, then the request to review, for example, I believe someone can request.
Chairperson, could I say that it's quite difficult at this stage to hear you, which may.
Okay. Let me just quickly mute or unmute myself and take my video off.
Chair, if the question could be repeated from the beginning, I apologize, but we hardly got any of that. It broke up all the way.
No problem. It isn't amazing, it seems, so I will repeat myself. So me, what is important is I would like to know, for example, see in the review, appointment, the law will govern it differently. That's the first thing. Secondly, depending on the type of appointment it is, it will govern the remuneration also. The remuneration is obviously determined by the board in terms of the act. So the board must also take factors into consideration. In my mind, it makes sense that if someone disagrees, such as the minister, for example, as an oversight, they have an executive authority, they have the right to ask for review. Now, in my mind, similar to in a court fashion, asking for a review doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get the answer you wanted. But asking for a review is essentially saying that I want to make sure that you have taken the facts you should have taken into consideration, and then to see whether the outcome matches the process that was undertaken. But I'm very happy that both and the minister has agreed to do an independent review, because that way I do think that also by bringing feedback to the committee, we'll, in terms of process, whether the process in terms of the law and in terms in good governance. But those I think from my side questions. But I'll hand over and to Mr. Spencer to answer the relevant questions where relevant. I'll start with the minister. And please forgive me for leaving my video off. It seems that my connection is very poor. Thank you.
Chairperson.
Thank you, Chair.
Chair, just before the responses, I would also like to ask a question, please.
Honorable Dagmar, I didn't see any hand raised from you earlier, but you want to ask a question?
No, I did indicate on the feature of putting up the hand, but what I would like to ask the board members, the presentation also referred to the makeup of the staff members at Wesgro and the issue of women, the issue of race. I appreciate the fact that that was explained. I think one of the big issues that any board of this nature or any company need to consider is the issue of the wage gap. There's a big debate raging around the inequality in South Africa and income disparity in regard to those that occupy senior management positions and those that occupy more junior positions in the organization. And I want to ask whether the board members present could give us an idea about what is the approach of the board towards income disparity within the organization, because you have a situation where the board is motivated very strongly about the complexities involved, the skills required by the CEO, but clearly the staff members of Wesgro play a critical role in positioning the organization. And when one has a policy towards the remuneration of a CEO, but we're not hearing, and I'm not saying there isn't such a policy, but how is the disparity at the present time between what CEO earns and the bonuses which are available to the CEO compared to what junior staff members earn and the bonuses which are available to them? I think that's a critical issue in terms of any discussion about remuneration of senior executives. So I would like to ask, firstly, what is the current policy in regard to narrowing the wage gap and on the issue of performance bonuses for other staff members? I think that's a critical issue to consider when we are looking at the position of the CEO. Thank you, Chair.
Honourable members, our chair just indicated that she unfortunately got kicked out of the meeting due to poor connection. I do see Honourable Mackenzie's hand is up, and if it would be fine with you for him to respond while the chair is trying to get back.
Yes, Chairperson. I just had yes, thank you. I just had a couple of questions as well. Chairperson, when I initially raised the point of order as the meeting started, my fear was that we're going to dilute issues. You know, in Afrikaans there's a saying, "Het gaan oor die hond of gaan oor die halsband." If somebody come to me and talk to me about the dog, I talk about the dog and not the leash. Because nobody and none of us throughout this has ever said the question of Westgrow or the performance of the CEO was into question. I think there's a particular matter of the review that we just wanted to get clear, and the matter being in the public display, that we just wanted to get guidance. Because I can hear again some of the questioning as a former DA member. I knew where it was going. Because like I said, I've been a member of this parliament for 6 years. So I knew exactly where it was going to. This thing is going to become totally confused. So I really would like us and the chairperson, if you can, just to focus on why we are here. Because based on my experience, I knew exactly where this was going to go. We can focus on the matter at hand. And I heard from Mr. Spicer and from the minister, there's a review. And I think Member Conlon did ask the question about the timelines. We can just, from my perspective, this is my opinion, just get an indication, that, because it was agreed, where's this process, how far is it going to be, when is the review, when is the report going to be made available and sent to this committee, obviously from the panel. And I would also like to, in the mandate, perhaps just kindly ask that the report from whoever panel that they agreed to appoint it also gets sent directly to the committee. So it doesn't first go to the board and they add their 10 cents. So when the report arrives by us, it's minus this view or that view. And then the last point, which I know we'll deal with in the resolutions. If former board members don't want to come, and I heard the chairperson use the word, the former chairperson does not want to, which is quite weird in terms of accountability purposes. So for me to take somebody's written comment seriously, at least I should have the opportunity in this or any other committee of this parliament to interrogate that report with the writer of that report, whether it's a former member 2 years ago, a year ago. So unless somebody comes in this committee where one can ask questions to the writer or the author of the report, I really find it hard to take such a report seriously, particularly if they use words like, I don't want to, because I'm a former member. It really doesn't sit very well with me, because there are laws in this country. And if you make decisions when you were chairperson of the board, you must be able to stand them, even if you're not the chairperson of the board. But those are the things that we hopefully the review panel in the report can share with us the 100%, nothing diluted. So we as a committee can make a decision going forward and let Westgrow continue what they do and do their good work. Thank you.
Can I raise a point of order, Chair?
It doesn't seem as if our chair is back in the meeting, Honourable.
Honourable van der Westhuizen, if I may suggest, would you be able to chair in the interim as a full member? That's a proposal from my side.
Thank you, Honourable Mitchell. Honourable members, we've also been going for an hour, and I was wondering if it would be in order for you if we just pause for 5 minutes and just see if Honourable Bartman, I presume she would be trying to come back into the meeting, and it would be quite awkward for her if she misses the responses. Can we pause or adjourn for 5 minutes, please?
I would support that, Chairperson.
Thank you, Honourable Dugmore. It's just seems to be about just after 10 o'clock. Can we come back, let's say at 10:06, please, if it's fine with you, Honourable members?
Okay.
In order, thank you, Chair.
Video also off, just in case. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairperson. I think given our connectivity challenges, I will also keep my video off. I will traverse the questions asked. There were clearly questions specifically put to Michael Spicer, and I think there are some questions that are probably more appropriately responded to by Michael Spicer, and I will try to indicate where I think that applies. First, in respect of the questions put by the Honourable Andrikus van der Westhuizen, there was a question in relation to whether the agreement to conduct an independent review had been agreed to by the Wesgro board, and I will leave that question obviously to Michael Spicer to respond to. There was then a question relating to the mandate and whether that would be done in consultation with both parties. The broad scope of the review has been agreed to already, and I set it out in my opening remarks. To the extent that there might need to be further specifics, we will certainly agree to that jointly. As to who conducts the review, again, we will agree to who conducts the independent review jointly. I can give the honourable member that assurance. Then on responding to the Honourable Nomin Kondlo, the inquiry which I conducted, of course, confirms the issues which I raised in my opening remarks, roughly relating to remuneration and the decision relating to reappointment and the decision to remunerate the CEO. So the inquiry confirms the issues which I raised in my opening remarks, but it's certainly not part of this independent review. The review will be separate and it will be independent. On the question of whether ex-board members will be whether their views will be taken into account, we still need to finalize the details, but of course we will have to discover documents to the parties that conduct the independent reviews, and the documents which you have in your position, including documents from both Mr. Brian Fagaji and Ms. Judith February, will be discovered to the independent reviewers. And certainly as far as I'm concerned, I mean, if the independent reviewers want to interact or engage with both the former chairperson and former directors, they are absolutely free to do so. On how the process will work, there are three specific issues which require, I think, some specialization. So on the issue of whether the process and the decision to reappoint the chief executive officer complied with applicable laws, our approach will be to engage a legal counsel to look into that matter. On the question of whether the process and the decision to reappoint the chief executive officer and to determine whether his remuneration complied with good governance principles, our approach there will be to look to an auditing firm with specialization in that sphere to look into that matter. And then again, on the whole question of the benchmarking exercise and determining the level of remuneration, we will have to engage a firm with the appropriate expertise to look into that matter. On the whole question of the free and independent and the reference to Wesgro, I'll obviously leave that to Michael Spicer. There was a question about casting assertions. I will also leave that to Michael Spicer. There was then a question about verbal appraisals and processes within the board. I'll leave that to Michael Spicer. And also, there was a question about the decision to renew, I think in August 2018 or 2019. I'll leave that again to Michael Spicer. There was then a question about political interference. I think that is how it was put. I, of course, dispute that. As I said in my opening statement, I do have an executive oversight role over Wesgro, and my approach at all times was to inquire and then to ask the board, precisely because the board is independent, to reconsider or to reapply their minds on the issue. And so I do not regard that as overreach. But I think that matter is now more or less moot, given the fact that we have agreed that we have been in very good and constructive discussions, and that we've agreed to the independent review. I could not quite make out the questions posed by you, Honourable Chairperson, but I did understand you to refer to the process of, whether this was a reappointment and what bearing that might have. I think what you were referring to, of course, is Section 10 of the Act, whether this was a reappointment or a renewal, whether the process should have been conducted in the way whether the interpretation of the board, or whether perhaps the alternative interpretation is correct. I'm not sure if that is what you were referring to, but of course, as you said, these matters will now be traversed in the independent review, particularly in the section where we try to determine whether the decision and the process to reappoint the Chief Executive Officer complied with the applicable legislation. There was a question from the Honourable Dugmore, which I'll also leave to Michael Spicer. And then the Honourable Ricardo Mackenzie made several comments, but also asked a question about timelines. Now, it is a little too early to tell, but I can certainly confirm from my point of view and from my discussions with the board that we are both committed to ensuring that this process takes place as soon as possible, precisely so that we can get back to the business of economic recovery in the Western Cape. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you so much. Mr. Spicer, I'll hand over to you now.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. As to the Honourable van der Westhuizen's question, I think Minister Maney has mainly traversed it. I should just add that we did indeed have a board meeting last night, and we confirmed the agreement. We confirmed all the main elements of it, and the key factor that all the decisions will be reached jointly. And I think the Minister then has highlighted the further points that we need to refer to on that. In terms of Honourable Nkontlo's question, I don't think I ever used the word free, but I referred to the board as independent. Clearly, we operate within a legislative framework set out in the Wesgro Act, and we account not only to this committee, but other parts of the administration, and there is clear provision for oversight. Oversight, of course, refers to a rather general kind of operation, and the legislation is very clear in terms of who enjoys the right to make decisions. As a board which is independent, it clearly has the right to make independent decisions about strategy, remuneration, and so on. But obviously we operate in a particular context. We are mindful, since we work absolutely hand in glove with the department, about the department and indeed the administration's economic goals, their strategies, and we align very much how we govern Wesgro with that. So I don't think it's a case of free or unfettered. The debate really has been where does oversight get to, and at what point does it cross the line? But as we have indicated several times during this meeting, that will be now subject to independent review, and hopefully we can finalize the matter. The term of the current CEO, the first 5-year term, would have become due earlier this year. He did receive additional offers of employment in the middle of 2019. And so that triggered a discussion in the board and a decision, since the board was mindful to reappoint the CEO for a second and, of course, final term. He's only entitled to 2 terms, to set the ball rolling. And indeed, the ball was set rolling and then dropped, if I may continue the metaphor. It would have been concluded at the end of last year, but it moved over into this year. So that precipitated it. The question of whether it's a reappointment or renewal, as indicated, that I think the Minister dealt with, and that will be subject to the review and will be determined by that. Honourable Doug Moore, I'm pleased you asked that question about the wage gap. In fact, we had been talking at the board, and our minutes will confirm that for some time, that we were concerned that overall pay rates were not aligned either to the public service or indeed, even more so, to the private sector, and particularly both at the bottom and the top. And so the benchmarking exercise covered the entire organization from top to bottom. And as a result of that, we adjusted a number of staff members who were out of kilter with the medium-funded NGO benchmarks for equivalent jobs, so that the process of adjustment did not apply simply to the CEO. It applied throughout the organization, and we are, in fact, compressing it. A number of ad hoc hirings have taken place that are out of range, and so those who are out of the bands that apply are being compressed, as it were, over a period of time down, and those who are out of bands underneath are being pushed upwards. So we're very mindful of the need to benchmark the entire organization, and the bonuses that apply to the staff are now equivalent to the CEOs, so that they are able to enjoy the same performance outcomes for their endeavors. If I haven't, Chair, I'm afraid your questions really did not come through. Obviously, if you want to reformulate them, but the connectivity issue was really quite interfering with that, so I didn't get terribly much of what you were asking.
Thank you so much, Mr. Spicer. I do believe that between yourself and the Minister, you also covered my questions and comments as well. I'm going to take another round. Honourable Mvimbi.
Thanks very much, Chairperson. I thought that maybe some of the reason I did not ask in the first round, some of my questions will be answered, but now that seeing that they have not been answered, let me just raise a couple of them. Now, also, Chairperson, it's always very important to state that at this committee, we are conducting oversight over an entity that is answerable or accountable to this committee. So I think it's sometimes a bit uncomforting to find members wanting to try and stifle the fact that we are conducting oversight over some of these entities. And I will really appeal to members that let's not come prejudging the matter. Let's allow discussion to flow, and based on the discussion, we can actually lead to some understanding or to some decision. For example, now, one of the matters that has been raised here is, while some other members have been here for 6 years, I'm here almost for a year. So some of the background that has been given by Wescro has been very helpful to me in actually even understanding the organization further. That is actually what makes me to be able now to ask some of the questions that I'm actually going to ask. Specifically on the issue of the independent review, I would have loved to have find out whether who's going to be responsible for it. Is it going to be the department that's going to conduct it via the minister? Or is it going to be Wesgro itself that is going to appoint this independent? And then how much is it going to cost as well? Because sometimes that's very important, not because I'm concerned about the cost, because in some instances when we want to exercise our oversight and accountability, the issue of cost is always being put in front that this is going to be costly, we cannot do it. And I hope that we are not going to use this. We must try and make sure that we get to the bottom of this issue that we are actually confronted with. Who's going to be responsible for appointing? Is it going to be the department or is it going to be Wesgro? And then who's going to also fit the bill? Now, whilst issues maybe just also that can be answered by either Mr. Spicer or the minister. Now, in relation to because I know Mr. Spicer has raised this a lot, the issue of the independence of Wesgro. Whilst Wesgro is independent, but it still remains a public entity. So it must also allow to subject itself to public scrutiny and to public accountability. As I read in the letter that it says that the letter that was a response from Professor Figachi, it says that the decision to increase the salary or to pay the salary increase was taken at a closed meeting. I think in the introduction of the letter. Then it says that there was a meeting on the 21st of February. It was taken at a closed meeting and it was done verbally. I think that's what the letter says. And then subsequent to that, there was a meeting of the 20th of March. That's when some members have raised their concern. Now, it is quite alarming, Chairperson, that a matter of this nature can just be discussed verbally and in a closed meeting. Maybe some of the lesson we are learning out of this is that while the entity is independent, it must not actually conduct its manner in a way that is actually hidden from the department and also from the provincial government. It will have helped. Maybe one of the lessons we are learning, maybe I might even say that we should even look into whether shouldn't a member of this committee, either is you as the chairperson or an appointment of the minister, to also to be part of the meeting, especially of the board, especially when decisions of this nature are actually being taken. Because of the lack of that relationship, we have to learn about this now in the media. If it wasn't for the fact that it was the members that raised objections, who would have known about this? So maybe it's also a lesson that we are learning, that maybe it's about time to actually reconsider strengthening our relations with Wesgro by making sure that they are even members of the provincial legislature that are serving in the board. Now, the fact of the matter is some of the questions will have also been maybe best answered if some of the writers, especially Ms. Judith February as well as Professor Figachi, were also present here. I don't know whether we are just going to leave it at that, because I believe that in terms of the powers of this committee, in terms of Section 91D, it says that in performing its function, a committee may subject to the constitution, legislation, and other rules of the House, summon any person to appear before it and produce documents. So maybe at some point we might actually want to relook into that as well and see whether, if we are not satisfied with some of the answers that we are getting here, maybe we can actually invoke that through Chairperson. I'm just going to stop there for now.
Okay, thank you, Honourable Mvimbi. I will address the questions to me once I've taken Honourable Nkondlo's hand. Honourable Nkondlo.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the responses from both the Minister and the Acting Chair. And I think perhaps as part of the process going forward, and I think some will discuss as we do undertake resolutions. Because I think for me as a member of this committee and an active citizen in South Africa, the issue of governance and leadership in public entities has been a matter of public concern and public interest. And therefore, there could never be anything wrong with, as part of our oversight, both from the executive, that is given mandate to implement government policy, together with ourselves, with our oversight, to engage in such a conversation, especially once it lends itself in the media space. There is nothing wrong with that. And I appreciate actually this conversation, because even here in the Western Cape, it demonstrated after a lot of conversation about state-owned entities, in particular the national linked ones, that even those nuances, referenced by the remarks of the Vice Chair, that even ourselves here in the province, we are not immune to them, given, the tricky balance. And I think Mr. Spicer was trying to allude to that point, that there will always be this tricky balance in terms of interpretation from what them as Westgro board, versus what the executive authority, believes is his responsibility and ourselves. And I'm happy, because I think that was an issue I was going to ask, that I'm happy and I'm hoping or submitting that I think as part of the points of the independent review, such once again as it has been, I think there's a lot of literature about it, also international benchmarks around, what would be oversight, of state-owned entities between the executive authority and the boards themselves. So I'm happy that the matter will be included. I think that's what the Minister was saying, because this clarity is very important, because this clarity may create relationship and leadership crisis, as it is currently doing, if one reads from the insinuations made in the letters of the former chair, about the alleged interference of the minister, which I think the board says they believe, according to Weber Wenzel, that is executive overreach. We must get clarity about that matter, because it is important for us to know. So I wanted, I think, to affirm that particular point, that I think it would form part of the scope of the independent review. But also maybe one question in that regard, Chair, would be to understand, or such can still be sent to the committee, of what would be the cost of this particular exercise and who is going to be financing such an independent review. If that matter, if at this point, it is not clear, because maybe the scoping is still being done, I do not mind if that information can still be sent to the committee at a later stage. The other issue, Chair, is that for me, I think as part of the discussions on this matter with the rights of the board in terms of, such decisions of appointment and reappointment, I would think it also becomes very clear, because when one reads the letters, between the minister and the board, it becomes very clear that there are gaps in the process, or if there is a clear policy of Westgro in terms of how such a reappointment must be done. 2 points I want to raise in this regard. One is the fact that, in the process, it is indicated when Minister is asking about such a process, it is indicated that in Wesgro, it has been a standard that the appointment, apparently that's what it says, the appointment of the current CEO was done by the chair and the vice chair, not through the HR or what in other board committees would be the remuneration committee, which is REMCO, which is why I had asked if we can get a submission from that committee. I pick up, whilst there was no answer from that, I pick up because of that particular peculiar, I would say peculiar to me, because I may not know whether that is standard practice, that at Wesgro such issues are dealt by the chair and the deputy chair, which leaves a very interesting relationship, which is another issue that I think also in the process that the minister raises is the uncanny, if I'm using the right word, pardon me, English is not my first language, an uncanny relationship that may arise between the chair and the CEO as an incumbent if you have such a process. So for me, once again, the issue of the reappointment or the appointment process needs to have a very clear policy from Wesgro that is determining this, which is actually according, to practice, including, I think, what the vice chair has raised now, that here you had a contract of the CEO that is ending early 2020, but already the board in August 2018, almost more than a year, was already confirming the reappointment of the CEO. And if indeed the appointment of the CEO is performance-based, surely what the conversation should be informed about, is that performance. And at that point, if one becomes mechanical about time, at that point, the contract of the CEO was not, yes, was at the tail end, but you still almost had, a year, almost 2 years performance periods that you needed to assess. So for me, it was already preemptive for the board, at that point in 2018 to say, we are confirming reappointment. Actually, what you are doing now is more, confirming a decision that you have already made when you start making all, which is a post facto. And I think it's also another issue that Minister is raising. It's a post facto where you now come with the benchmarking exercises and everything, because the decision you have already made, and this speaks to a potential subjectivity of a decision that could be made. This is why I'm saying the issue of the appointment and reappointment, I would think it needs to be included in the review so that there is a clear policy about this particular process, but also the institutional arrangement of where this particular process is who is the custodian of the process, because you have a HR of the board or that committee that must be responsible for human resource, including remuneration. You can't then have, a particular peculiarity when it comes to one member who is the CEO. And if that is, it must be, I think, clarified what is the rationale thereof. So I just wanted to raise those issues, Chairperson, to say I am very happy with the fact that we ask for this matter to come here so that whilst we are not directly responsible for deciding to increase the salary or not, but the context and the framework through which such decisions, gets to be made are a matter of public interest, are a matter of the committee, are a matter of the department, because the department is going to be implementing a government policy, and the department is going to be implementing, financing based on decisions that are made by this particular parliament. So I think we need to be able to create some kind of harmonious relations, both in law and in practice, in terms of how the different roles, which is ourselves as the committee, the role of the EA in this sense, and the board must work in such a way that nobody believes that there is overreach. But where there are particular indications of some challenges, I think we must have the maturity of being open enough without trying to stifle debate to come and discuss so that we can resolve whatever discord that is there, so that Wesgro as an entity continue to do, the work that it is mandated to do. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honourable Nkondlo. Honourable van der Westhuizen.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, a very brief input, and I do hope that you will find this also to be within the agenda for today. I cannot think that any individual whose remuneration has become a point of public debate could feel very comfortable about that. Now, my question is this: what are the potential risks for Wesgro that the current debate may hold? How severe are those risks? And how can those risks, if any, be mitigated? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honourable van der Westhuizen. I will quickly deal with the questions that were to me, and then I will hand over to the Minister and the chair, acting chair of the board. Honourable Mvimbi, you suggested that I be appointed or that a member of the committee be appointed to the board. I'm going to respectfully disagree with you. I do not believe myself, neither the committee, should end up being judge, jury, and prosecutor. Otherwise, we will be completely, essentially part of decision-making and part of oversight, which is not the mandate or the purpose of this committee. And I don't think we should be embroiled up in governance as well. In terms of summoning and producing of documents, as you may know, that since the article has reached the news, not only have I written to the Minister to request clarity, as well received then the answers from the board, which was distributed to everyone. That this particular meeting was then called with the Minister and the Wesgro board. And we have also now learned that there will be an independent review which will cover most of the comments and statements made by you and Honourable Nkondlo as well. I think the only questions asked that have not previously been answered, but the Minister and the board chair can decide which previous answers to reiterate. The only ones still to be answered really are the cost and who will be financing it, because the Minister indicated that they'll be seeking legal counsel, that they'll be approaching an auditing firm, as well as a firm for the benchmarking. So who essentially is going to be footing the bill. And then Honourable van der Westhuizen asked questions regarding risk as to this particular debate. Regarding the other comments and questions, I will leave it up to the Minister and the Wesgro board to highlight previous answers where already put. Minister, I'll start with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairperson. I will endeavour to answer the honourable members' questions, and where appropriate, leave some questions to Michael Spicer. So, in relation to the Honourable Mvimbi, who is going to be responsible, particularly for costs, we are going to be jointly responsible, and our current approach broadly will be for the Western Cape government to take responsibility for the first part of the independent review, which of course involves legal counsel, and for Wesgro to take responsibility for the second and third part of the independent review. I think that we will be ad idem, given the fiscal climate, to do everything we can to keep costs down, and ultimately the costs of the review, as per our current plan, will obviously be shared between the Western Cape government, in this case DDAT and Wesgro. There was then a question or comment relating to board processes, which I will leave to Michael Spicer. There's also a question or comment relating to the former chairperson and the former directors and whether they will appear before the committee. That, of course, will be a committee decision and has been traversed by the chairperson. Then the Honourable Nomi Nkondlo made a comment about the issue of governance and asked a question about cost, which I think I've answered in the first question. Her specific question, though, is what will this cost? It, at the moment, is too early to tell, but of course, we will commit to keeping costs down. There was then also a question that related to the appointment and reappointment and processes and policies at the Westgrow board. I will obviously leave that question to Michael Spicer. Safe to say, of course, that the reappointment process will be traversed in the independent review, both in relation to whether it complied with applicable laws, as well as whether it complied with good governance principles. To the Honourable Andrikus van der Westhuizen, he points out that there are some risks, and I think he's correct to do so. And he asks the question how those risks can be mitigated. In my view, the risks can be mitigated by ensuring that this independent review is executed swiftly, so that we can get back and focus on the core business, which of course is economic recovery in the Western Cape.
Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, Chairperson.
Mr. Spicer.
Thank you, Chair. The Minister has covered some of the aspects, the relevant aspects for the department and himself. So let me turn to Honourable Mbimbi. The only question I think that is left unanswered is, in fact, both the Western Cape government and the city have an ex officio member. In the case of the province, the Director General of DDAT is a board member, ex officio, on the board, and it is his task not only to report into the board the views of the province and the administration, but also to report back from board meetings to the minister, the department, and the administration as relevant. So that process is underway, and it depends very much naturally on the performance of the individual as to whether that is fulfilled in either or both of the inward and outward reporting. I appreciate Honourable Nkondlo's recognition of the delicate balance and the difficult balance between oversight and the remit of the board, and that, as she indicated, is the subject now of the review, so we should get clarity there. Just one small correction. The board only began to consider the matter of a possible reappointment of the CEO in August 2019, not 2018. I think the figure is correct in the documentation. And that was triggered, as I indicated earlier, by him reporting that he wished to continue, but he did have alternative offers of employment, and could he get clarity as to whether whether the board was minded to consider this. So there was no reappointment made then, but we triggered a process to consider the possible reappointment with the soliciting of a benchmarking exercise. And again, as I indicated to Honourable Dugmore, that was not simply to consider the matter of the CEO's remuneration and benchmarking, but also of the entire organisation. In terms of governance, and that process rolled through to the board meeting of February 21. The board makes the decisions in terms of the reappointment or appointment, and it makes the decisions in terms of the salary and conditions. What has happened, and this is aligned very much, and I'll ask Johnny Copeland, who has extensive experience in the private sector, as I do myself. It is absolutely the norm in the private sector for the CEO's evaluation and remuneration to be considered by the chair, in our case, the chair and the vice chair, but then naturally to be reported back for discussion and for decision making to the board as a whole. The board, the chair and the vice chair don't take the decision. They sit down with the CEO and they evaluate his performance according to all the previously set and, as I indicated, monitored, evaluated, audited performance of the entity and of the individual. And then they make a recommendation through to the main board. So in this case, that is absolutely what happened at the board. The board was closed because the relevant, and that word simply indicates that appropriately, at the relevant parts, the meeting asked the CEO to recuse himself so that it could discuss without him or any of the other executive management this issue. And the same point I think we've made, that in terms of the benchmarking exercise, insofar as it pertained to himself, he was not part of that. Once we had done the evaluation, the only part that concerned him was the management of the rest of the staff of Wesgro and their conditions and how they would be affected by the benchmarking exercise. In terms of the mitigation, Honourable Westhuizen, I think the Minister has indicated that the sooner we get the review process underway and completed and reported appropriately to yourselves and other entities, the sooner the agency can return to what is now very pressing business, given the state of the economy in the Western Cape and indeed of the country as a whole. What has pleased me very much, and I must once again thank the ministers for the members for their conduct and the way that this committee has been conducted, is that it has reflected an appreciation of the role of the agency and of the individual. And I believe that is important because we have a Herculean task ahead of us in trying to restore the health of this economy. And I'm very much pleased and privileged to be part of that undertaking. I do want to ask my colleague, Johnny Copeland, who has been in virtual attendance, if he has any other matters that he wishes to raise. He is a very experienced person, so he might have something that I have left out in dealing with the individual questions. Johnny, do you want to add anything? Maybe some comments about, as an ex-politician yourself, now very much involved in business. Would you like to comment?
Thank you. I think Mr. Copeland can comment on the relevant questions that or comments that haven't been dealt with yet, or the input that he could give given his experience. I don't think it's necessary to bring necessary politics into the answers. Thank you. Mr. Copeland? Mr. Copeland, just remember to unmute yourself. No, I'm unable to hear you at the moment. Have you unmuted already? Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to mute everyone, and then I'm going to ask that you just unmute yourself again, just so that we can see if that works. Okay, I have muted everyone. Try to unmute yourself now. Yes, we're still unable to hear you. No, still unable to hear anything, Mr. Copeland. Mr. Spicer, is it possible just to find out whether oh, actually, Wasima, Zahira, sorry, I'm getting confused between the two committees now. Zahira, is it possible to ask IT to contact Mr. Copeland regarding IT? But if possible, if it's nothing that is urgent, is it possible for us to ask then Mr. Copeland to put his input in writing then to us?
Chair, from my perspective, absolutely. I will ask him if he has anything additional to add.
Okay, thank you so much, and apologies for that, Mr. Copeland. It seems that you're unable to unmute and stuff, but thank you so much. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to allow for the Minister and Wescro and any other officials that are in the meeting to leave in order for the members to deliberate on our own admin and resolutions. And I just would like to thank the Minister and the board for responding so quickly, not only to the letters, but also to the invitation. As everyone may know already, that the committee has an oversight role, and I'm very proud of the Western Cape Provincial Parliament in the way that we exercise this oversight role in ensuring good governance and ensuring that the processes have been followed. So thank you so much, and I will allow both to leave the committee now. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. I'll just wait a minute or so for the officials to leave. But as you know, the meeting is public, so those who stay behind are obviously welcome to stay and listen. Okay. Okay, members, I'm going to take hands now for resolutions. Okay, if none, then I have one. Okay, Honourable Mackenzie.
Chairperson, can we just get clarity in terms, because I really want to make sure that I didn't misquote you earlier on. In terms of the former chairperson, the words he used is because the way he said he didn't want to be in front of the committee. Is that my right? Is that the exact words he used? I just want to get clarity on that.
No problem. He said he did not want to attend the committee meeting because he felt it would be inappropriate as a former board member to attend, given that he's not on the board at the moment. And I completely understand, given that the board is also its own legal juristic person and essentially takes a decision as a board and not as individuals. So I do understand his decision. Honourable Nkondlo and then Honourable van der Westhuizen.
Okay, I'll come on after. Thank you.
No problem. Honourable Nkondlo.
No, thank you, Chairperson. I first want to really ask the indulgence of the committee. I think there is, for me as a member of this committee, I think sometimes one just feels, that when we raise issues here, when members do not agree with our opinions or somebody that is not necessarily, presenting an opinion, that is in line with others. And I'm raising at this particular point about this particular meeting, because this particular meeting, other than the chairperson who has indicated that she wrote, I made submissions to the chair, similar to what Member Mackenzie did yesterday in the budget committee. And I believe, members, we really need to help each other so that we don't create an environment where we stifle each other and we just use jabs, to try and stifle debates. I think that's the first point I wanted to raise, because I just felt, this meeting was indeed us trying to understand what is out there in the public discourse, and out of that, hear what the minister says, instead of coming already, with support of a review that at the point when we are asking the questions, we were not aware of. I think that for me smells a lot of subjectivity on how we deal with the matters as this particular committee. The issues I wanted to raise, Chair, in relation to the resolution is that I would think with the independent review that has already been raised, which I got a sense that in the main we're all in support of, and it will come back. I would think for me, if we can get from the committee the scope of that particular review, which would include some of the proposals, I think that have been made on the areas which some the minister has alluded to, and some of the areas that I think were raised here in the committee, whether those things will be included in the review. Again, I think it is the issue of the cost implications, of this particular review, which I believe, I think for the experience of state-owned entities in the Western Cape, under the Western Cape government, is very important, because I think, as we know, we also have got other entities that are coming in, like the Atlantis SEZ, and others, I'm sure, in future that will come. So such a review, I think, will strengthen, governance, and also our own oversight, so that we know where do we start and where do we end, and if in practice, as things changes in the material environment, what are some of the ways through which such issues can be resolved. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honourable van der Westhuizen.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I would like to propose as a resolution that we as the committee welcomes the undertaking by Wesgro and the MEC for an independent review of the interpretation of the relevant legislation, the procedures followed in the reappointment and the determination of the remuneration of the Wesgro CEO. Then I think Honourable Nkondlo's suggestion that the mandate under which these independent review, it seems actually from what the MEC said that there may be more than one review, that we ask that the mandate of the review panels be shared with this committee. Then thirdly, that this committee be served with copies of the findings by these review panels. And then fourthly, that we as a committee reiterate the dire need for economic growth in the Western Cape, and we appreciate the role of Wesgro in this mammoth task that we will have post-COVID. And those would be my proposals, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Honourable Nkondlo and Honourable van der Westhuizen's proposals speak to each other. Members, are we happy with that proposal then? Okay, I'm going to assume that members, if no one, Honourable Mvimbi, yes?
Yes, Chairperson, I don't know how we can actually factor this in the resolution as an part of a lesson that we have actually learned from this, because when I was raising the issue of a representation in an entity, I was not actually raising it with a view of wanting to interfere on the day-to-day affairs of the entity. But we've also learned that the department is represented there by the DG. Now, but then for some reason, I don't know whether was the DG present when this matter was discussed there, but the minister seemed to have been surprised, as we were surprised through the media in terms of this decision. Maybe as a practice in future, that either the minister or this committee be briefed on a regular basis, either by reports. I know we do have quarterly reports that we receive from Wesgro by way of them coming to report to the committee. But maybe whenever a meeting of importance that have said of the committee, that we be actually appraised of the decision that have been taken there, by way, not necessarily for them coming to appear to us physically, by way of regular report on the outcomes of their meetings.
Thank you, Honourable Mvimbi. Honourable Mvimbi, I don't really understand the resolution you're making. It seems that obviously from the first part you agreed that
yes,
the
I don't
committee
have
should
a problem
indicate
with what
the
has been
board,
said,
but
maybe
okay.
we put an additional one that we receive regular monthly reports from the entity.
Okay, so your resolution, am I correct when I say your resolution is to ask that we receive reports on the decisions of the board?
Yes, it will help.
Okay. Okay. Given that the board responds directly to the MEC, I'm not sure if it might be more appropriate for us, the minister and DDAT, to do a what do you call it, a feedback to us. But Honourable van der Westhuizen, I saw your hand, yes?
Yes, Chair. I'm
Honourable
just
van der Westhuizen.
concerned. Yes, I'm just concerned that quite often these boards don't meet on a monthly basis, and to have a monthly report then on their decisions might be a frequency that is too high. And I was wondering whether we couldn't rather than change that to a quarterly report with Honourable Mvimbi's
No problem.
consent. Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you, Chair. And perhaps, Chair, I'm also not sure, and perhaps Honourable Mvimbi could help us here. Does he mean a quarterly report on now on the dispute that there is, or the review that is going to be undertaken? If you could just help us
on the
whether
decision,
it's a performance
on the decision,
on the decisions, on the implementation of the decisions of this committee,
of the board.
Okay, Honourable Mvimbi, let me just quickly try and understand. Would you like, whenever the board makes decisions in a quarterly manner, those decisions to be reported to the committee? Is that what you're asking?
Yes, via the minister, obviously. They don't have to actually bypass the minister. For example, Chairperson, this issue,
yes,
as important as it is, a decision was taken in March, April, May, June. It's only run about in June that we actually got to hear about it. But if we were having this interaction, a report was going to be written to the minister immediately, and thereafter we'll have a way of actually getting a report around that important matter. And I can guarantee you, if we did not hear about this in the media, it was never gonna come to the committee.
Okay, I understand your request now, Honourable Mvimbi. Okay, I'm going to take Honourable Nkondlo's hand now.
Thank you, Chair. I would also, I think, in context to the governance, which I think on one hand, Wesgro argues as executive overreach, perhaps in what Member Mvimbi is raising, because indeed, if the executive authority is represented by the HOD, the question would be the gap between such in informing the minister, because the HOD would be acting on behalf or as per, a mandate from the minister. Perhaps I think in the review, I do not know how to couch it, but in the review, perhaps that type of a mechanism at this point, and its strength should be something that needs to be considered, because you do not want to get to a situation which I think the former board chair alleges, about a good relationship with the previous MEC, who is currently the premier, and the current minister, because indeed, in this particular relationship, if indeed the board or the executing authority was represented through the HOD, the question is, where did the information gap, or information flow come in? Because you do not want relations that are depending on who becomes the executing authority or a minister when another minister changes. So that is why I'm saying, Chair. Perhaps it's an issue of that particular mechanism. How does it become strengthened, or as part of this particular review, its effectiveness in ensuring, harmony in terms of communication between that person who represent the department, in this sense, the HOD, versus the minister who is, the custodian of that particular department. I'm not sure whether I'm making sense in trying to, I think, to respond to what a member Vimbi is raising over and above a report that will come to the committee. Thanks.
Thank you, Honourable Nkondlo. If I could perhaps summarize your input, perhaps it might be easier for us to request whether it be possible that when legal counsel is sought regarding the relationship and the independence and things like that with the minister, that perhaps they also ask the legal counsel regarding the interpretation of the role of the ex officio person serving on the board from the department. And that, I think, might be able to assist the committee in understanding what that relationship is supposed to be. Honourable Nkondlo, would you be happy with that?
I'm okay with it, Chairperson. Thank you.
Okay, and then Honourable Mvimbi, with yours, with Honourable van der Westhuizen's suggestion, is it possible for us then to, instead of monthly reports, get quarterly reports through the minister then?
No problem, Chair.
Okay, and then Honourable van der Westhuizen's resolution with Honourable Nkondlo's suggestion as well in the resolution. I'm happy with that because they both speak to each other. Is members happy with that? With regards to that, the committee welcomes the undertaking that there will be an independent review, and then Honourable van der Westhuizen listed the things that were going to be in the review, and that the committee is served with the copies of the findings when the review is done, that we ask that the mandate of the review be shared with us once it is completed, and that we reiterate the dire need for economic growth and appreciate the role of Wesgro. And I remember Honourable van der Westhuizen using a lot of other fancy English words, but I think that it has been captured in our recordings and the procedural officer as well then. But is everyone happy with that then?
Yes, Chair, we are.
Great.
Okay, and then I would just like to ask if we can just ask that once agreement has been struck as to who will be doing the review, that we just be furnished with written agreement between Wesgro and the minister and or department as to, yes, they agree that this is who's going to be doing the review, just so that we can be satisfied that both parties are happy with who is doing it, because I don't want it to be one of those situations where people come back and tell us, no, they did not agree to the particular person or company or whatever. Is everyone happy with that?
Agreed.
Okay, any other resolutions? Honourable Nkondlo?
Yes, Chair. I think Member van der Westhuizen raised a very important issue. I might have not picked it up in terms of response, but the issue of risks, as it relates to this particular process in the bigger scheme of, the leadership, governance, and the stability of the entity. Perhaps it's something that we need to get, we need to get some written response, to it, especially with the fact that with what we have seen already, that already we lost 2 board members, irrespective of the fact that, one exited, whilst the term was about to end. But I don't think it's the right way in which I think we lost the chair of the board. But I'm just saying, I think it opened up, as I think the Honourable Member van der Westhuizen has raised, a bit of a risk in that particular area. And perhaps we need to understand also, in consideration, that now that there is this particular issue on the table, it may not necessarily have any other effects into, the stability and the leadership in the entity, including, the current incumbent, which is something that I think, if there is such a risk, we need to be able to understand between the department through the minister and Wesgro board, how are they managing this particular process, because we do not want to see massive resignations, from this point or whatever instability to the entity, including, I think, what we would await from Mr. Copeland that we could not hear, I think, because of technology. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honourable Nkondlo. Could I summarize that as that we ask written input regarding the risks regarding this topic from the Minister and the Wesgro board? And that he can submit that in writing, for example, to us. Would that be okay, Honourable Nkondlo? Okay, Honourable Chair. Okay, Honourable Mackenzie.
Thank you, Chairperson. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Chairperson, on the point that and I'm not sure when.
Loud and clear.
Okay, when are we going to make this point? Earlier on, I raised a point about a board member that is the chairperson resigned and I didn't want to come to the committee. Now, unfortunately, that's not how government operates. You can't just resign and then suddenly avoid all accountability for decisions that you made. Whether there's a legal entity there now or not, we've seen it with a State Capture Commission. Former people were invited nicely. Those that were not invited, like Dudu Miani, were summoned. But we're not there yet. But we need to deal with the matter properly. It's important that we understand what are the issues that the members raised that caused and hopefully, so even if the review do interview the deputy chairperson or board members or former board members, and they are going to send that report, it will be important, let's talk for myself, for me, to understand the decisions of the review, and if those members, particularly if this committee did invite them and they're not coming, because it'll be there what the review committee took into account, what those members said, and not what they represent to this committee. So you can't evade accountability just by resigning. I just want to hear what the committee's view is on this matter going forward.
Okay, Honourable Mackenzie, would it be possible then to summarize, or for me to suggest then, that as part of Honourable van der Westhuizen's previous resolution, that we just urge or reiterate or request that the persons who resigned from the board previously also just be included in the independent review, that their versions or the situation that involved, and depending on what comes back, I would suggest then we can then go through the review findings before we make a decision going forward. Then, Honourable Nkondlo, I saw your hand.
No, thank you, Chair. I'm not far from your response. At the same time, agreeing with Honourable Mackenzie, about this notion, which is why for me, even initially, I'd asked that we get both of these members to be here, because when one reads on their letters, actually, Ms. February, on one hand, cast aspersions, I think, on the response given by Professor Pfikaji, around her own views, on the process of the matter. So I think indeed, once a person has put an opinion out there, it becomes important that that person, accounts on it. And I think as Parliament, as we have seen also, with other state-owned entities and government departments, whether you have exited the system, from an accountability point of view, you can still be recalled, to try and answer. So I want to support what you've just raised, that in the review, they be given, an opportunity, to come back. And hopefully when we get the findings, it would be at that point, if we believe, when we look at the findings, that we still might require them to still come back to us. But I would think at this point, the review process, we must just communicate such that we would recommend and encourage that they be given an opportunity, so that it is not this one says and the other one says, because the former chair made serious allegations in terms of, how Wesgro's leadership, actually he makes very serious assertions about what he believes going into the future with the current administration, that actually there will be somewhat a chaos. So you do not want to leave such, you know, to the whims, you know, of the universe. So I want to support that notion that they be given now, and we then test once the report on the findings comes back, if from where we are sitting, we would need to ask them or subpoena them to come to the committee. Thank you, Chair. And I know you are very good in summarizing, you know, my long elaborations. that is not my strength. And thank you to have you as my chair in that regard.
No problem. Okay, have I? Thank you so much, and thank you. I aim to please the committee in terms of summarizations of resolutions. Who am I hearing? Honourable Vimbi, yes?
Just before, I hope I'm not going to disturb you, or you won't forget how to summarize, you know, but I just wanted to check the way I understand Honourable Mackenzie was that he would have preferred those members, those two previous board members, to also come and make their presentation in the committee. Is it how I understood Honourable Mackenzie via you, Chairperson?
Absolutely right, by the chair.
Okay, members. Now, I think we've made a decision on this.
If I may continue, you know,
yes, on the
what is interesting about both those comments of those two people is not what will be even more helpful to the committee, is the fact that they both have divergent views. So it's not a question of that we invite them because they agree with each other. It's because because they're both coming from, I will say, strong extreme of disagreement. I think it will actually empower the committee more, actually, if they can also be given an opportunity. I understand the review process. The review process might take another elongated time frame. But as a committee, we do meet, for example, now we are in session. I won't have a problem if we are saying that we'd like them to come and make a presentation. Just give a space of about half an hour to an hour of them in our next committee. I really wouldn't have a problem with that.
Okay, thank you. I hear you, Honourable Mfindi. I would just like to urge members for us to allow the review committee to do its job. And the reason I say this is because if we then now go and invite people to start understanding the process in between the independent review also occurring, then I fear us essentially doing our own investigation while an investigation is being done. I would like to urge members that let us wait for the review. Let us see what this independent review will bring us in terms of its findings, because it will be legal counsel, it will be an auditing firm, and it will also be a benchmarking firm. So I do believe that given the type of organizations that will be involved, that they will likely come back with very, very comprehensive findings to us. And I do not want us to anticipate what those findings may or may not be. And so that us then engage those findings once we receive them. And I would like to request that we take that route, please.
That's what we're saying, Chairperson.
Okay, thank you. Members, if there are no other resolutions, then we are done with this meeting today. Thank you so much. And thank you
Chair,
for being here today.
Apologies, Chair.
Yes, Honourable.
Don't we have quite a long list of minutes to approve? Perhaps Sahira could just assist.
I don't. Is it on for today? I thought it's on for the next meeting. Let me just check here.
It's for the next meeting.
Thank you, Chair.
So it's the next meeting, yes. The next meeting, members, the resolutions that we sent in regarding Kanaland, will be discussing the proposed resolutions at that meeting, as well as the other administrative matters of the committee, including the long list of minutes. Thank you. And members, thank you so much for bearing with me with my connectivity issues. I will be asking IT to assist me with that. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Chairperson.
Okay, goodbye.
Bye.